Hello, everyone. Today you will learn interesting facts about the Middle Ages, a journey to 13th century England. Close your eyes and imagine stepping back 700 years to a quiet English village at dawn. The only light comes from the pink eastern sky and a few smoking hearth fires in timber-framed houses. Roosters crow across plowed fields where peasants rise before sunrise to tend the crops and animals. In the distance, a castle tower stands silhouetted against rolling green hills. There were no modern conveniences, no electricity, no refrigeration, no mechanized tools, only the rhythm of the sun and the seasons to guide each day. Life was hard, but woven with beauty. Forests full of songbirds, river water cold and clear, and communities bound by shared work, faith, and festivity. In this tale, we wander through that world, learning gentle, vivid details about how ordinary people washed, cooked, worked, traveled, believed, and celebrated in 13th century England. Daily life in villages and towns. By morning light, the village hall is awake. In a peasant house, a single big hall with a thatched roof. The smoke of last night's fire still colors the rough-hewn beams black. Inside, straw rushes cover the packed earth floor, laid out anew at spring cleaning and scattered again daily by clucking hens and busy children. A mother sweeps ashes toward the door, only to have the family cat chase through them and send dust flying again. Overhead, hams of salted pork and bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters. Pots bubble on the central hearth as the farmer's wife and children bustle about, sweeping up spilled grain, fetching water from the brook, or rattling oats into the mortar. The scene can be chaotic. A dog tugs at a wet hide, a baby in a straw cradle coos at the firelight, and a sleepy husband yawns beside the hearth. But it is home. Sunlight through the doorway shows simple wooden benches and trestle tables, a big cauldron of porridge on the fire, and wooden bowls waiting to be filled. Outside, the fields wake up too. 90% of people farmed, so most of the village works the land. As the first amber rays hit the wheat, men and women pour into the open, plowing, sowing, or leading sheep to pasture. Even smallholders had a few acres and a cow or goat. Each family might also graze animals on the commons. The community divides labor carefully. Men plow or fell wood. Women tend the gardens, churn butter, or spin yarn. Every household owed labor on the Lord's fields at busy times, especially harvest, but otherwise villages were surprisingly well organized. A reeve or bailiff supervises the common plow, and someone keeps the roads clear. Even brewing was shared. Ale turned sour fast, so one family would brew enough for several households. Then the neighbors took their turn next week. In this way, no one got drunk on too strong old beer. When harvest came, neighbors helped each other bind sheaves and carry in hay. If a child was born, villagers donated lambs or chickens as a gift. Their world was very local. Most people married, worked, and worshipped within a few miles of their birth. Marriage was usually chosen within the village, often a nearby farm or one over the hill. So daily life was woven with the songs, laughter, prayers, and even the dances of familiar neighbors. Evenings were communal too. After a long day's toil, villagers sat in the hall or outside the cottage under an apple tree. The meal is simple but hearty. Coarse brown bread or porridge made from barley or oats, or rye in the north, thickened with peas or beans, and a little salted meat or dried fish when they could afford it. Everyone, old and young, men and women, dips into a common wooden bowl. A spoon might be silver only in wealthier homes. Most ate from wooden or horn utensils. They wash up with ale or cold tea made from mint or roses. Food is bland by our standards, but prices make no difference. What the lady of the manor eats, the peasant's diet echoes, except richer meat and spices belong to noble tables. In fact, scholars note that villagers' simple diets were often healthier. A typical peasant plate was dominated by vegetables, pottage or stew, and bread, with only an occasional bit of bacon or salted herring. Nobles, by contrast, feasted on roasts, pies, and sauces on meat, often at banquets of many courses. Church rules also influenced meals. 1 out of every 3 or 4 days required a meatless diet of fish, eggs, or vegetables. The image of the dirty, starving medieval villager is more myth than truth. Townsfolk live similarly, but a bit busier. In a market town or fair, cobbled streets ring with merchants shouting their wares and carts rumbling over stone. Woodworkers, weavers, blacksmiths, and bakers have shops or workshops near the square. A small-town family often keeps a cow or chickens outside the walls, but buys many foods from shops. Apprentices and journeymen, sometimes 8-year-old children, sit on stools, watching tradesmen shape leather or iron. Cookshops and taverns in towns offer ready meals. Travelers and the very poor could pay a penny for a steaming bowl of broth or pie. Guild halls enforce quality. A baker's son trains under other bakers rather than his father, so each trade remains honest. On festival days and Sundays, church bells halt the work. Townspeople don quiet best, and guilds proudly display their banners in the procession. Yet at day's end, the daily scene is not too different. A family eating bread and cheese around a tavern bench. The cries of market criers fading with the sunset. Castles and noble households. A half-hour's walk from the village, a different rhythm holds. A local lord resides in a sturdy stone castle or manor house. Imagine a broad moat and tall keep, with a great hall hung with tapestries for warmth. Inside, dozens of people live and work under the lord's roof. The largest role is the steward, who runs the estate as the lord's manager. Under him are officers like the marshal, in charge of horses and household security, the chamberlain, who guards the private chambers, and dozens of lower servants. The kitchen alone is a small army, a head cook with several assistants and scullions, overseen by the pantler, keeper of bread and salt, and the butler, in charge of the wine and ale. There are butchers, bakers, brewers, and even a poulterer for the fowl, a spicer to manage the exotic spices in barrels, and a larderer in charge of fats and oils. Servants clear plates and pour drinks. Sometimes the lord's own children serve as pages or squires, learning manners by waiting at table. The lady of the castle has her chamber, with maidens who help dress her, and a lady-in-waiting to keep company. There's even a chapel. A small monk or chaplain says Mass daily and leads prayers for the household. In the castle stables, grooms feed the lord's war horses and hunting hounds, preparing for the hunts and patrols ahead. Life in the castle runs on routine. At dawn, the chapel bell rings. Nobles and senior servants kneel for morning prayers before breakfast. Then the steward convenes with accountants and clerks to collect rents, write accounts, and plan the week's work. Meanwhile, the kitchens are fired up. A great cauldron of meat stew simmers from the night's deer. Big loaves of wheat bread bake in the masonry oven, and the aroma of roasted venison drifts into the hall. The common table is set with pewter platters, wine in goblets, and loaves of bread. The lord and his knights sit at the high end, the rest of the household at long benches. Castle food can be rich: roasted boar with honey, spiced sauces with pepper and cinnamon, brought by merchant ships from the east, and sweetmeats for dessert. To digest all this, nobles amuse themselves after meals with hunting, falconry, chess, or listening to minstrels playing lutes. Far from idle, however, many earn their keep. At least once a week, there must be a great feast, which the pantler and butler must prepare. Leftovers are salted or turned into pies and sent to feed the peasants or to stock larders for winter. The castle's routines continue day and night. Craftsmen are employed. Masons and carpenters repair walls and workshops. Tanners and blacksmiths work in the bailey. Midday meals are followed by siestas or card games. In the evening, torches light the great hall again. The family retires. The lord and his family to their private solar chambers, others to beds in the barracks rooms above the hall. Even in medieval times, the lord could summon the king's touch each week to heal any local who suffered from the king's evil, scrofula, passing on his blessings by hand. It was said a form of miracle cure. Such beliefs ensured even nobles felt a common thread with peasants. All petitioned saints or miracles for help. The lines between classes were clear, but daily life in a castle had its own structure and quiet moments. A castle was home to more than just martial duty. It was a great household, pulsing with its own calendar of tasks and prayers. Hygiene and bathing. Medieval people were actually cleaner than we often think. In every home, morning and evening washing was routine. A morning ritual might begin with warm water poured from a wooden jug into a basin. Good sense even then taught that cleansing face and hands could ward off illness. Many households, even among the unwealthy, owned brass or pottery ewers and basins by the 1300s. Mothers used scented rinses of crushed herbs, wine, or vinegar to wash babies, and men shaved daily or every few days to stay tidy. People also scrubbed clothing, soaking linen in wood ash lye or sometimes even in stale urine, an effective bleaching agent. In short, dirt was deliberately fought. Medieval medical writers warned that leaving grime on the body was unhealthy. A 13th century treatise listed dozens of herbal baths and soaps using honey, herbs, and even wine to keep skin and scalp clean. Actual bathing in tubs was rarer. Most villagers used a wooden barrel with the top cut off. The children bathed quickly, then the parents, each in the same water. It was said that a whole family might take turns in one barrel, so a naked grandfather might see his grandson stepping in. Doctors advised caution. Medieval thought held that bathing could open pores and make one vulnerable to damp cold. So some only bathed in spring and avoided winter immersion. Nobles, however, enjoyed more luxurious baths. A wealthy lord might soak weekly in a wooden tub brought to his private chamber, with attendants pouring hot water and sprinkling rose petals and chamomile into it. King John famously traveled with his oak bathtub, and King Edward III at Westminster Palace had lead pipes bringing him bathwater. After a soak, bath boys would rub the lord dry with linens, and servants would comb or perfume his hair. Even so, summer was considered the best season for bathing, and people would avoid it after a heavy meal or during cold weather. In towns, public bathhouses, rare as they were, became scandalous by the end of the period. Overall, 13th century Englishmen tried to be neat. Daily basin washing and combing were the norm, even if only the wealthiest indulged in a full scented bath. Kitchens and larders. Food, cooking, and preservation. From dawn till dusk, food is at the center of every household's day. In the village or castle kitchen, an open hearth with a spit or a large iron cauldron is the stove. Cooks ladle thick stews of mutton and root vegetables, browning pieces of pork or beef. All cooking is done over wood fires. Ovens are rare, except in a manor house or town bakery. A typical family's midday meal might be a bowl of porridge, oat or barley pottage, or coarse rye bread dipped in broth. Vegetables and herbs from the garden, onions, leeks, cabbages, beans, bulk up the fare when meat is scarce. Surviving accounts show even peasants enjoyed sweet herbs. Mint or coriander might flavor ale or wine. At harvest, everyone gathers to feast on the new wheat bread and roast lamb or venison, celebrating the abundance. By contrast, a lord's table might feature roast boar with honey sauce, peacock pie, and spiced eggs baked in pastry. Elaborate, but still mindful of seasons and church fasts. Farmer's cheese, fruit tarts, apples with honey. These too can be found at both peasant and noble boards when available. Cheese and ale are daily staples. Water could be murky, so each farm brews its own beer, and almost everyone drinks weak ale from morning to night. Storing food against lean times was essential. Every autumn, families worked to preserve the summer's labor. Meats, pork, beef, venison, are cut into joints, heavily salted, and hung in the smokehouse until dried and edible for months. Fish caught in summer are salted or dried, herring, eel, to last through winter. Fruits, like apples, pears, or berries, are either dried into leather or boiled into preserves with honey and vinegar as early jams. Cabbage and beans are turned into sauerkraut or pickled in wooden barrels of vinegar and salt. Butter is churned, pressed into molds, and stored in cool cellars, sometimes buried in straw for extra insulation. Even herbs from the garden, parsley, thyme, chamomile, are dried on racks. Spices such as pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg, imported from overseas merchants, are used sparingly as seasonings. They also helped mask the taste of very old food. In grand manors and some villages, communal ovens are fired twice a week, so every family can bake bread and pies. Yet the base of the diet remains humble: brown rye bread or oats porridge in the north, white wheat bread reserved for the wealthy south, barley beer instead of wine. Most rural folk can't afford imported wine. All through winter, stew and soup form most meals. Only by spring does the fresh grass fatten new lambs, and wild greens and berries return to spice up the table. In good years, the pantry overflows. In bad years, jars of preserved plums and salted bacon might be the difference between comfort and hunger. Little ones, children and learning. Children were cherished as they are today, though their world was different. Babies would often be swaddled tightly for the first months, and wet nurses might care for noble infants as pastors urged mothers to feed their own babies when possible. By toddlerhood, a child runs about freely. Folk wisdom even recommended bathing children regularly to keep them clean, hardly the filthy ragamuffins of legend. Up to age 6 or 7, life is child's play. Little ones scamper barefoot, help gather kindling or pick herbs, and spend summer afternoons beside the creek chasing tadpoles. A 13th century scholar remarked on their lively nature, one moment laughing and shouting, the next crying, noting that they quickly train easily, but love chatting and never keep secrets. At about age 7 or 8, the path diverges by class. In peasant homes, a boy of 9 might be entrusted to his older brothers or neighbors to help herd sheep, reap crops, or learn a craft. Children do light chores like sweeping or minding animals. Girls would learn spinning and weaving, or milk the cows alongside their mothers. There is no formal childhood school for most rural kids, but they absorb skills through work and through church schooling when available. By the late 12th century, many towns had a small Latin school paid by parents. In wealthier towns, literate parents send children to a monk-run school for a basic education. Notably, until about age 11, these schools often accepted both boys and girls. Girls needed literacy to inherit land or run family businesses. But teacher might charge a penny a week, and pupils learned to read psalms in Latin, count, and recite the Lord's Prayer. Rarely did they learn beyond that, unless destined for the church. At age 7, noble and growing artisan children begin formal training. A boy of gentle birth is sent off to be a page in another lord's castle. There he learns courtesy, swordplay, horsemanship, and Latin, by copying letters with a monk or tutor, all with a household of other pages. He will even serve at the Lord's table, so he understands the rhythms of high society. Girls of the upper classes also move on at 8 or 9, usually to another household or convent to be trained in etiquette, sewing, music, and religion. If unlucky, a child might be pledged to a relative as labor from infancy. Peasant families even indentured younger children as servants or apprentices to richer households. By adolescence, a craft apprenticeship is common. Guild rules forbid a master from formally training his own son, so a boy joins the workshop of a distant master to learn the family trade: weaving, shoemaking, carpentry, etc. This also taught discipline. Medieval families viewed helping at home as education in itself. Thus, children's lives gradually shift from carefree play to responsibility. They are fed, clothed, and valued, but expected to work by their teen years. Yet every home with children still cherishes them. Infants are named at baptism by a priest. Often, a neighborhood church bell chiming on an infant's naming day was a proud moment for parents. And portraits on windows of Saint Margaret or Saint Nicholas remind all to pray for the little ones. On the move, travel and communication. If you needed to go anywhere, you walked, far more often than by any vehicle. A healthy person could cover 25 to 30 miles in a day on foot, which meant even villagers sometimes journeyed far for markets or church festivals. Carts pulled by oxen or horses carried heavy loads of wood, grain, or cloth. But they were slow. In one tale, a progress of carts drawn by dozens of horses took 3 days to climb a mountain. Couriers on horseback traveled much faster. A mounted knight could ride 30 to 40 miles a day on a good horse, and by changing mounts, he might go even farther. The fastest messengers could cover 50 miles or more a day by relay, but this was exceptional speed. Remarkably, many English travelers still preferred mules or donkeys on rough roads. The pack donkey was sure-footed and cheap to maintain, and many priests and paupers adopted it as a humble badge of piety. After all, Christ entered Jerusalem on an ass. Only the wealthy rode sleek war horses. Travel by water was another option. Barges on the Thames or coasting ships could move a large load with less effort. But rivers froze in winter, and storms could wreck boats, so it wasn't always reliable. In winter, people sometimes went on pilgrimages to stay occupied, but mostly the cold and mud kept each village quiet Until spring, sending news was even slower. The church, the crown, and the emerging universities employed scribes and messengers, but ordinary folk relied on word of mouth. A cathedral or abbey might keep a courier to carry letters between cities, and kings had royal riders racing on relays. Some monasteries and merchant towns developed networks of runners or mounted men for urgent dispatches. Still, most messages in the 1200s arrived by horse only if someone could spare it. Otherwise, the news traveled by travelers or by the one-letter-at-a-time post of friars. Town criers and tavern gossip also spread rumor. In practice, it could take weeks for a letter to get from York to London. When secrecy was needed, few trusted the roads. Tales tell of messengers hiding tiny letters in their staffs or boots, even dressing as pilgrims with reliquaries to pass unnoticed. Thus the world felt very large. An urgent word from one shire to another was a rare thing, and patience was a virtue when awaiting news of an heir, an army's march, or a longed-for news of peace. On the road, everyone slept and ate much as at home. Simple inns, often called hostels, outside towns offered a bed on a straw pallet and a stew of meat or fish with peas porridge at about a penny a meal. The highway was not always safe. In some forests or marshes, outlaws could lurk, but often travelers were greeted by friendly commoners or monks. If traveling men brought lutes or dice, local children might gather to watch or even join in a dance, exchanging the cares of the road for a moment of human warmth. Body and spirit, health, medicine, and beliefs. Medicine in the 13th century was a blend of ancient science, herbal lore, and religion. Physicians still believed in the four humors of Hippocrates and Galen, that the body's health depended on balancing hot-cold and wet-dry, or blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If someone had a fever, a doctor might bleed or apply heated cups to the skin to release bad blood. Herbalists were immensely important. Every monastery had a physic garden filled with healing plants. Monks and nuns grew mandrake, sage, willow, and over 600 other simples, using recipes handed down from the ancients. If a villager got sick, he might first go to the monastery infirmary or ask a wise older woman for a concoction of herbs and honey. Apothecaries in town sold prepared salves and spices for medicine. A little opium or mandrake oil for pain, aniseed for coughs. Many cures were based on tradition. Chroniclers report things like tying a frog or eel to the body, or wearing an amulet of a dried viper's head, though church fathers disliked magic cures and pressed reliance on prayer. Barbers and surgeons treated wounds and fractures, pulling teeth or lancing boils. Great hospitals existed in some cities: London's St. Bartholomew's, Paris's Hôtel Dieu, even niche places like the Hospital of St. Anthony for skin disease. Still, most care was home-based. A barber might bleed a fevered peasant or apply leeches if they could afford them. For childbirth and childcare, midwives and wise women were called instead of physicians. They attended women with hot compresses, herbal potions, and rituals, carrying a sprig of rue or saying the Lord's Prayer as the mother labored. Believe it or not, Christian doctrine taught that Jesus' example made physicians into servants of God, and so even medieval surgeons did their work in humility, often asking a priest to pray at the bedside. With no germ theory, people blamed sickness on bad air, miasma, imbalance of humors, God's will, or even the alignment of the planets. Astrology was part of medicine. Physicians consulted lunar calendars and star charts to choose the best day for phlebotomy or to sow fields. In fact, by the mid-13th century, scholars like Bishop Robert Grosseteste were writing simple weather prognostications, combining observed winds, clouds, and planetary positions to forecast drought or frost. Most farmers, though, watch the clouds and animals, a roaring owl in daylight, or calves born with teeth, were taken as portents of storms or plague. The divide between medicine and superstition was thin. People prayed constantly for healing. Relics and shrines were centers of faith cures. For instance, tiny flasks of St. Thomas Becket's sanctified blood were carried by pilgrims seeking cures. We know St. Fiacre's cult, patron of herbalists, was strong in this period, and poor folk even wore amulets called fiacres to ease pain in the hands or bowels. Every household kept a pocket prayer or wood-engraved psalm. A prayer bead of St. Christopher around the neck was thought to guard travelers. King Edward VI's heirs believed the touch of the anointed king could cure the king's evil, tuberculosis scrofula. Indeed, 13th century chroniclers note that even when the lord of the manor passed his hand over a sick man, many would get up proclaiming a cure. In truth, most treatments healed little. The best defense was cleanliness, as they tried, and time. By 13th century standards, hospitals and pharmacies were advanced, but folk remedies prevailed. A countryman with a boil might burn St. Anthony's fire with sacred bread, their epithet for ergotism, or chew an herb while muttering a charm. Whatever the source, prayer, herb, or humble surgeon, people took solace in doing something, and the community in turning to its customs. The ringing of church bells at noon, the sharing of bread, the brewing of balm and bone tinctures, all intertwined, body and spirit. Festivals, fairs, and seasonal rituals. Throughout the year, the community looked forward to breaks in the hard routine. People back then actually enjoyed far more holidays than we do, roughly 60 a year on the medieval calendar. These were both religious and secular festivities, and even peasants could dance for days without working the fields. Candlemas on February 2nd heralded the return of light. Churches blessed candles, and the bright fire from them was thought to ward off colds and storms for the coming year. Everyone in the village hung those blessed candles by their beds as talismans. By midwinter Yule, Christmas, families feasted on capons and old ale. In spring, Easter and Whitsun, Pentecost, brought elaborate celebrations. Each saint's feast day had its own customs. On May Day, Beltane, youths danced around maypoles and baked cakes of young herbs. On Midsummer's Eve, travelers would sow seeds with a coin in hand under a full moon to ensure fertility, and light bonfires to purify fields. All Saints' Day on November 1st and All Souls' Day on the 2nd brought lantern-lit processions to honor the departed. Charitable families left out bowls of porridge for poor souls. The line between Christian and pagan blurred. The church grafted old traditions onto its saints. Children might carve turnips on Halloween in imitation of strange spirits, or gather St. Martin's clay from churchyard graves on his feast, November 11th, hoping for favorable weather. In a gentle way, the medieval year was alight with ritual. And on all these days, even tired serfs set aside scythes and looms to sing and enjoy themselves. A village feast in summer. When spring came, the village would burst into carnival. Whitsun, the 7th Sunday after Easter, became a week-long church ale, On the green, men and women danced around a maypole or bough-covered arch, wearing flower wreaths. The whole town gathered for garlands and games. Long trestle tables were set up outdoors, where neighbors happily shared freshly baked bread, boiled mutton, and home-brewed ale. Morris dancers in colorful ribbons performed between the tables, and a local king of the May, often a choir boy or the village fool, was chosen to preside over the revelries. Folk plays were acted out too. Peasants dressed as Robin Hood and Maid Marian, fools and devils, and paraded through the streets. The spirit was joyful and wild, a holdover from ancient spring rites. In that mood, a sleepy village feast comes alive, as the image above shows, with music, laughter, and the clatter of wooden plates as everyone celebrates the end of winter's privations. Street entertainers at a fair. Later in spring, Hawktide, the second week after Easter, brought playful contests and more revelry. Men would go out in village teams to seize as many women as they could, in good humor, demanding a small ransom in coins for their release. Afterwards, the women returned the favor. These friendly rounds raised church funds and broke the winter's shy reserve. Costume dances continued. Villagers donned garlands or animal masks and performed till midnight. Even tolling drums or mock battles took place. Such communal fun was so beloved that centuries later, Henry VIII tried to ban it as too papist, but the people kept on regardless. Meanwhile, towns held great chartered fairs that drew people from far afield. On special dates, for example, Stamford Fair at Lent, St. Ives Fair at Easter, Winchester Fair in autumn, the market square filled with colorful tents. Merchants from all over Europe arrived in their wagons, bringing bolts of cloth, wine, spices, and exotic imports. Under the protection of church and king, everyone from noble ladies to peasants mingled. Jugglers, minstrels, acrobats, and even dancing bears thrilled the crowds. Children clapped as jugglers tossed knives. The smell of roast meat and fresh wafers wafted through the air. Masters haggled for German furs or Italian sugar, but everyone, young and old, lord and serf, shared in the spectacle. Fairs were something like medieval festivals, and market rolled into one. A time to trade, feast, and be entertained together. By Lammas, August 1st, and Michaelmas, September 29th, the harvest bounty was celebrated with barn dances and wine. As autumn turned to winter, the calendar cycled back to its holiest days, and the village again settled into quiet preparation for the cold months. In all these ways, harvest feasts, saints' games, and the simple turning of the seasons, 13th century Englishmen found delight and meaning throughout the year. Social classes and gender roles. Underneath these scenes lay a strict social order, yet daily life was remarkably interwoven. The nobility, clerics, and peasantry each had their place. A lord and his knights lived off the labor of those below him. Most common people tilled the land or served craftsmen. Nearly everyone attended the village church, for religion united classes. Even kings claimed God-given power, and parish priests saw their flocks at Mass each Sunday. Children of peasants and nobles alike learned basic Christian teaching and prayers. Law and custom dictated modesty. Women and men ate separately at feasts, or at opposite ends of the same long table. And a wife's role was as important as her husband's, though in different ways. Noblewomen supervised household wine cellars and woven cloth, and managed the home if the lord was away. Peasants' wives worked alongside their husbands in the fields or dairy. Girls spun wool at the cottage wheel from a young age, while boys handled the plow or worked as stable lads. Even leisure was gendered. Men hunted or jousted, whereas women might dance or play dulcimer in the great hall. Yet both men and women prayed to saints. A knight might invoke Saint George for victory, and a mother invoke Saint Margaret in childbirth. Class differences also showed in diet and clothing. Noble households ate richer foods, white bread made from wheat, sweetened mead or imported wine, and meat at almost every meal. Peasant families lived on coarser fare, dark rye or barley bread and only occasional scraps of pork or fish. Peasants often wore homespun woolen tunics, dipped in alder bark to color them, and rough leather shoes, while knights might have silk-lined surcoats and polished metal armor. However, by law, even serfs were entitled to redress from a cruel lord and could not be entirely mistreated. A serf's life was hard, taxed in labor and produce, but he had a plot of land and the right to marry with permission. Noble children, for their part, had benefits of education and travel, often arranged by family marriages for alliances. In contrast, many peasant boys took the surname of the manor and stayed married within the hamlet. Only a rare peasant girl inherited land. Yet, in practical terms, daily life could blur the divide. A castle's bread might be the same brown loaf as any farmhouse's. A village craftsman's wife might speak to the lady's maid the next day. Wedding celebrations often brought all classes together on common ground, accompanied by church bells and cider. In a lullaby fashion, medieval life wove together classes into one tapestry. Lords in their finery, riding home by moonlight. Commons glowing by hearthlight, with stories on their lips. Everyone, rich and poor, man and woman, held a part in the community's seasonal song. For though their roles differed, their hopes for the harvest, shelter, health, and family warmth were the same. Nightfall and reflection. Now the day has closed on our journey. The hearth fires burn low, and quiet envelops the village. Chickens cluck into their roosts, and the last cow has been milked for the night. In cottages, families wash with cool spring water, eat a bit more bread and cheese, and lullaby the children with gentle songs of the earth. Above the castle, a lone lantern glows, where a watchman ponders the silent landscape. Whether rich or poor, people listen to the church bells ringing Compline as the North Star steadies itself. Thus ends another day in 13th century England, rooted in the soil, guided by the seasons, connected by faith and community. Let the soft sounds of this distant world, the whispering wind through oaks, the crackle of embers, the distant song of the nightbird, carry you into sleep, as they have carried generations before.